Mr. Speaker. Every society around the world is facing challenges in its health services, because health services are some of those services that people look to their governments to provide. They're one of the core things that governments provide. And yet the capacity of technology to provide more and more health services greatly outstrips the ability to pay for those services. So every country is facing big challenges around how best to put up the money that's required for health services, how best to distribute that money and decide what it's used for. And so in this country there has been for some decades actually a consensus that investment in health services should be rebalanced towards public health services designed to keep people well in the first place, and primary care services designed to deal with people's health needs in the community and as early as possible in their disease progression. That's for a variety of reasons. One, it's best for the individuals to not get sick in the first place or to be treated early, but it's also said because all of the evidence from the health economists suggests that investment in that part of the spectrum of health services provides the best return in health gain on the dollars spent. So there's been a consensus to do that, sir, and yet in this government, with this Minister of Health, that consensus has been thrown out the window, because this Minister of Health is driving the investment in the other direction. And Sir Tony Ryall, Minister of Health, at the point that he leaves that job, I think that'll be 2014, might well be advised to seek a career on the stage as a magician, because he accomplishes that magician's trick of diverting attention away to this glittering prize over on his right-hand side, while at the same time, with his other hand, actually pulling away the nut below the cup that's left on the table. Out of sight, out of mind. And that's what he's done with health. When he was the opposition spokesperson on health, as Chris Aukenville, I think, was saying earlier in this debate, he made a great job of talking about elective services, about waiting times for elective surgery, about the number of people waiting. He made it seem as if that was the main thing that the health services provide. In fact, it's about 5% of what health services do. So what he's done since he's become minister, sir, is he's actually, and I agree with Craig Foss, he actually has seen more resource go into elective surgery. There has been more elective surgery done. People are waiting less time for elective surgery. And in this budget, sir, he's done the same thing again. In some places around the country, DHBs are practically having to ambush people on the streets to pull them in to give them elective surgery, but certainly more people are getting it. And indeed, sir, there's more money for cancer services and more money for cardiac services. But, sir, that is accomplished at the expense of everything else in the health sector. That's the cost. The cost is less service, and in particular, sir, less service in the areas that we know actually provide more health gain. So the broader context, sir, is that health services face not only the consumer price index, they also face medical inflation, which tends to be somewhat higher. They face wage settlements that are higher than the average wage settlements because of the workforce crisis that we are experiencing and the higher rates available overseas. They face one-off hits like the unfunded changes to KiwiSaver that the government made in its budget last year. They face the costs associated with an ageing population, and we know, sir, that older people need more health services, and we need to spend more money on providing services for that group. And we face a growing population with all of the costs associated with that, sir. So when we learn that vote health has increased by just 2%, in other words, basically the CPI, actually we know the subtext is that health services have been underfunded. And Sir, the careful calculation of all of those factors I've just listed suggested that for DHBs to tread water, to be able to provide essentially the same set of services at the same intensity as they have been doing, in this budget they required another $465 million. That's an increase of about 4.4%, sir. Now, what the government actually delivered in this budget was an increase of $319 million, leaving DHBs basically $150 million shy of where they needed to be to retain the same level of service. Now, the government says that that'll be met by, increased efficiencies and trimming the fat and increased productivity. But what everybody in the health sector knows, sir, is that that will be met by cuts to health services. Now, every day, sir, we dig further into the individual budget lines in the health budget, and we come up with new gems that illustrate some of the detail of that service erosion. So, for example, in the area of clinical training, I've already mentioned the workforce crisis that health services face, yet in that environment, the only area in which training received a significant increase was in midwifery training. Most other areas of clinical training essentially were unchanged. So medical training essentially unchanged, sir, which will be astonishing for those working in the medical profession. And for those working in the nursing profession, the news is worse because the money for nursing training is actually decreased in this budget, actually decreased. The money for Māori workforce development actually decreased. That's some of the way that the government is funding that increased elective surgery. So some of the cuts are going to be the axing of whole programs, and we've seen that in the past few years, sir. That's one of the things the government does. Whole organisations that have been providing services no longer doing it. Their programs completely gone. But a lot more of it, sir, will be in the area of what we might call slow-burning cuts, where gradually the cost of providing services is transferred from the state to the people who need those services. And in this House last I guess technically it was Thursday, we were debating the government's unheralded change to the asset testing threshold for aged residential care. One of the ways in which government is subtly and behind the scenes trying to transfer its responsibility onto private citizens. Another example was the increase in the cost of medicines. It may seem like a small increase, but sir, for the family that's really struggling, that waits until lots of their kids actually need services before they go to the doctor, and they try and get multiple conditions for each of their kids dealt with, that prescription that has multiple items, each of which is going to have the increased cost, they are going to be going back into that situation where they have to decide which of the things on the prescription they actually get filled and which they decide to leave. So, sir, this is a budget that will see increased cancer services, but also a cut to the services designed to stop you getting cancer. It's a budget that sees DHBs $150 million short, but $150 million being provided for the refurbishment of the High Commission in London. It's a budget that sees no action on the workforce crisis. It's a budget that sees no action on the increasing rates of preventable hospital admissions, particularly for Māori and Pacific Island people. It's a budget, sir, that actually locks in inequality and sows the seeds of poorer indicators of illness, of disability and of death in generations to come. It is a failed budget.
The Honourable Maurice Williamson.
Mr Speaker, I intend to title my speech today